Hey there, and welcome to season 3 of Pause and Rewind. I'm Neil, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host and producer of my podcast, which is very much created for everyone. As usual, I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And, let's face it, we need it. We'll be diving into the moments, the realisations and relationships in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll be talking tales, anecdotes, and a little of what makes our guests tick. This is an 8-episode season going out during Pride season. And Pride really is a celebration of the LGBTQ+ community, but it's first and foremost a protest. Showing up has never been more important, and what we're seeing right now is the fight is definitely not over. Each of these guests has an amazing story when it comes to doing their own thing and how they're showing up in the world. And I'm so excited to shine a spotlight on their stories. So, with that in mind, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind, the penultimate episode for this season. I hope that your June and July have been lovely, the weather's been great. I hope that you've been heading out to Pride events, whether part of the community or an ally, that you've been able to tap into a little bit of joy, had some fun, because I know that things are still really challenging out there right now. And this episode, we do lean into that as I talk to this week's guest, Emily Hamilton. Emily's someone that I've gotten to know over the last few years since being in the queer inclusion space. I always love my chats with Emily. We go deep, we go light. Emily, I absolutely love her for her insight, her wisdom, and her very, very brilliant, dry sense of humour. Emily is Deputy CEO of Trans in the City, a fantastic organisation, and you're going to hear more about them during the episode. She's also a FTSE 100 Vice President with a 25-year in strategic change and transformation. And she's the founder and chair of the world's first LGBTQI+ supporters association in World Professional Rugby. That's QuinsPride at Harlequins. Never really expected myself to get into such a conversation about rugby, but given that was centered around inclusion, we talk about how that rugby club is a pioneer in what they're doing, and it's about changing one person's experience at a time. Really beautiful conversation. Emily talks a lot about trans and non-binary inclusion, mental health, as well as the business stuff. And we go deep into Emily's experience of mental health and suicide. So please do take care of yourself whilst listening. But Emily, this conversation is a challenging one because it is a challenging time for the trans community. So for everyone out there, whether part of the LGBTQ+ community, whether an ally, there is a lot in here for you. So enjoy, take care of yourself whilst listening, and let me know what you think. Cheers. Hey there, Emily. Welcome to Pause and Rewind. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for that welcome.
Your pleasure, and I always love our little chats that we get to have. But it feels really good to be able to sit down and have a proper deep conversation with you without some awards swirling around in the background.
Yeah, and so I mean, the punters can't see us at the moment, so it's amazing to see us both not all glammed up for a night out because we both look absolutely shit, like we've just woken up and dragged ourselves out of bed, which in my case is absolutely true.
I mean, thanks, I think. I'm comfortable enough to be this way around you, so it's all good.
It sounds
I
good.
always start with a question for my guests, and that is, what does the world look like for Emily Hamilton right now?
I think it's like looking through a gap in smoke at the moment. So everything is on fire. And there are people setting fires all the time, but there is a gap in the smoke, and I'm navigating my way through that gap. I'm looking for the light. I'm looking for, in navigational terms, I'm looking for that point of reference that I can navigate towards. And it's hard sometimes, but it's there. I can see it, and I am trying to defuse all the people who are setting fires and making the world burn as we go along. So it's exhausting. I am surviving. I am getting through it. Yeah, it's not as fun as it should be. but I will survive and I will get through it, and we will get through it. And that's my mantra on that one.
We absolutely will. Togetherness and community is something that comes up time and time again. I consider myself
Mm,
really, really privileged to be doing so much work around LGBTQ plus inclusion, particularly when it comes to the trans community,
mm,
in such fantastic company like yourselves, people from Trans in the City, people from Diva, across the board, we're
mm.
surrounded by amazing people, and and that is what gets us through, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. Community is everything, and you know it's so important. And the reason we know it's so important in terms of community, what is the thing that anti-LGBT people go after? They go after our community. They try to split us.
Mm,
And I can't remember if it's Sun Tzu or Clausewitz, with their sort of tracts on war. One of them says that, if you want to understand where you must defend, look for where your enemy is attacking.
yeah,
And they attack our community, they attack our cohesion, and they make grand statements like we are easily fractured or we're easy to break apart. And they're just statements. They're not true. They're not
no.
real. And they try to manifest them into reality. And that's where I get a lot of strength, is seeing that community around me, seeing people who aren't the same as me, but are part of my community, part of my family. I
Yeah.
think that's amazing. And that's that point of light through the smoke.
I was about to ask, what is the point of light through the
Yeah.
smoke? Through the smoke, what are you seeing? That you're seeing community. What else are you
Yeah.
seeing in terms of action that's taking place out there to counteract some of those fires that we're seeing being set?
I'm seeing organization. Organization is really important. Look, queer people aren't renowned for our organizational skills. Ask anyone who's been to a queer run event, and it is an absolute horror
I'm gonna
story
try.
of
I'm gonna try not to
organization.
take that as an offense, given I'm an events director.
It's fine, but there is a certain vibe about queer events, and,
There
and look, I
is.
run some of them as well, and we have the same thing. Um, organization has got a lot better over the last year, and I think the urgency around what's going on has really helped with that.
Mm,
I'm starting to see, not entirely, and I think we've got more work to do on this. I'm starting to see egos drop away a little bit. I mean, there's been
okay.
a lot of ego in our world, and there is still a bit too much, if I'm honest. And I think we've got to work on that. But I have a real belief that if you're going to get into activism, if you're going to get into advocacy for a community, you need to do it on all levels. So you need to have people who are shouty. You need to have people who are willing to put themselves on the line to protest and to get out there and to be a nuisance. You've got to have those people who are willing to have those backroom conversations. You've got to be out there talking to politicians. You've got to be talking to business. You need all of those strands. And I think historically, people in those strands have looked at those in others and said, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. You're doing your advocacy. I don't like the way you're doing that." I'm seeing a lot less of that in the last 6 to 9 months, especially. There's much more of an appreciation that we need each other. We need all of our forms of activism, and I think that's a really positive thing. And we stand with each other, even if we're not going to get involved in a different form of activism. I'm not. Well, let's never say never, but I'm not going to go topless outside number 10, right? But I absolutely stand up for those people who did. I applaud the people who did. We need the people doing that to do what they're doing, in the same way as some of them may not be going into the boardrooms and going in to talk to the CEOs of companies. That's the stuff I'm going to be doing, or standing up in front of a rugby crowd, the stuff I'm going to be doing. We've got to do it all together. And that means actually sometimes, as long as somebody's not actively hurting our community, you feel your boots, you get on with it, you do it, because we're going to stand together that way. So I'm seeing some of that, and I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. There does seem to be less fractions going on actually, particularly between the differentiation between your corporate inclusion activism versus the grassroots and community side of things. There's
Mm,
so much that different each of those different things can learn from each other as well.
yeah, and I never saw a difference. I mean, I've always been one of those people that saw. Maybe I'm bigging myself up and saying, well, I was all right. It was just everyone else that was awful, because that's exactly what people say.
Hmm.
Um, but I've always seen it as being something where you have to have all of those facets. I think what has changed with me is that there were times where I've been saying, oh, that's really counterproductive. That really pisses me off.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm getting much better at not getting pissed off by it. I look at it and I say, is it genuinely counterproductive? Is it genuinely something which is going to make a massive difference or an adverse difference? You know what, 99% of the time, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not going to be adverse. So I now applaud. I now say, yeah, I support that. I now say that's the right thing
Yeah.
to be doing. Um, so yeah, I think it has got better. I think there's still a way to go. I think there's still an undercurrent, and like every group, there are egos. I'm sure I've got one. We just have to remember that sometimes you just got to park it, particularly within the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
think I think it's allowing space for those egos to come through when they need to, right? Because
yeah,
because a certain amount of ego or queer delusion, say, it actually does sometimes drive change and gives us the confidence uh to go into things. I know when talking with Marty and setting up kind of Trans History Week and stuff,
yeah.
Marty, she very much lent into kind of like the sense of delusion in the best possible way of like, yeah, I can start a nationwide slash international new calendar movement and initiative. Why not?
Well, and somebody has to do that. And I think if you look at the founders of any organization, and
Yeah,
I I founded one, I'm part of others. If it wasn't there before, how do you know it's going to be okay? How do you
yeah,
know it's going to be all right? The only way you know is by doing,
yeah,
and finding out, because it'll go one of two ways.
yeah, for sure.
It'll either work or it'll fall on its arse,
Yeah.
and then you go and do something else. Go and open a bicycle shop or do something. Something that keeps you out of mischief.
Absolutely, but all of that takes a little, whether you call it self-belief or ego or confidence, whatever. You have to have a bit of bravery and boldness to do something
You
like
do,
that. Yeah,
you do, and it's overcoming fear, isn't it? It's
yeah,
it's it's wanting it more than you're frightened of it. I guess is the key thing, or needing it. I think maybe
yeah,
a more appropriate thing. And I think some of the things that have gone on. You mentioned Marty and Trans History Week, and you know we needed it. And I'll admit, I think when that was mooted, I was like, well, I'm worried about us splitting away from LGBT History Month,
mm,
do we want to split ourselves out? But I think the focus, and Marty's and the team have done an amazing job. The focus on our trans histories, because history's always been my thing, and
yeah,
I've always been very comfortable and happy talking about what's happened, because what is past is prologue, as Shakespeare says in The Tempest. I think it's Act 2, Scene 1. What is past is prologue. We have to learn from our past, and I think Marty and the team have done an amazing service in getting away from the very superficial histories that I think we've lived with. If you talk about sort of LGBT history, without any disrespect to a great person, but I'm fed up of hearing about Alan Turing.
right,
Alan Turing, amazing character, but it's just not enough that every
no,
year everyone says, "Oh, Alan Turing, amazing. He's on the £50 note." And no, I want to hear about the people you don't hear about. I want to hear about the
for
people who put
sure.
themselves on the line,
Yeah,
and that made a change. And again, we'll always come back to where I opened up. It's another point of light. It's another group of people making a light, a point of reference, a point of navigation for us that we can triangulate on. And I think that's amazing. And yeah, all power to people who set these things up and put their head above the parapet. Because don't ever
absolutely.
underestimate what it means to put your head above the parapet and to have your face out there and to be seen and to be heard. It can be very unfun sometimes.
We spoke, I mean, we were chatting about this literally before I hit record about vulnerability and
Mm,
visibility, and that bravery that it takes comes at a massive cost when
mm,
you are battling the really, really shit fueled rhetoric that's out there at the moment. I'm going to bring it into Trans in the City, right? Because this is a shining example of that. The work that you, Bobby, the team do with working with these big, small,
mm,
institutional, huge giants of corporates, right? To change trans inclusion and representation within those. Talk to me about Trans in the City. For anyone that isn't familiar with what does it mean? How did it come about?
mm.
And How can people support it?
Yes, I mean, look, Trans in the City, it's the world's largest sort of network of organizations working, of businesses and organizations working for the elevation of trans and non-binary voices in business. And it came about, frankly, it came straight out of the head of Bobby Pickard, who's the chief exec, and my dear friend. I think it's 7 or 8 years now, maybe 9 years now ago. She kicked it off, and it was really a reaction, I think, to the number of years she's been working in sort of trans and non-binary activism. It was really thinking there's a vacuum that's been left by governments, and particularly over the last 10 years or so, governments have really retreated from the equality space um, and driving diversity in business, and it's a vacuum that can quite successfully be taken up by businesses. Businesses have a lot of power, maybe too much power, depending on your politics. You may think they do, but they can have a power for good. And I think Bobby recognized that and started this process of really bringing companies together, going into companies and providing everything from a sort of trans 101. So you'd be amazed at how straight cis people don't really understand what it means to be trans or to be non-binary. They don't really have the fundamentals. So going in and really giving those fundamentals, taking it a bit further, so working with organizations that do have trans employees and listening to them, so having trans people listening to trans people and then almost translating that in a way that made sense for those businesses. Here's what you're doing well. Here's what you could do better. But fundamentally usualizing having trans people in your business.
Mm.
So that's the crucial thing. It shouldn't be something that is strange or exciting or unusual or surprising that you've got trans people, or as we often find, families of trans people working for you. So Bobby really kicked that off, and she's the first one to say for many years it was sort of the Bobby Pickard show, and she had people supporting her, but it was very much her thing. And I came on board. God, it must be five years ago now. So it was just after lockdown actually, and I'd met Bobby online, and we'd been chatting, and I'd gone to Brighton for a day just because literally lockdown had been lifted. It was, my God, we can get out again. And at the age of whatever I was then, 44, I decided it was time to have my ears pierced. So I'd never had my ears pierced, and I was desperate to have my ears pierced. So I thought I'll go to Brighton and have them done there. And this was a big deal. Went down, got my ears pierced, and I messaged, and Bobby was living in near Brighton at the time, and I said, oh, I'm in Brighton. Do you want to catch up for a drink? And she said, yeah, I'll come out and meet you. We went for a drink in Brighton. And when I left the pub, somehow we had sort of redesigned the structure of Trans in the City, and I'd agreed to become a director. And I'm still to this day not entirely sure how it happened. And I think that speaks to Bobby's powers of persuasion and who she is. But she's one of my dearest friends. She is an absolute dynamo. I think sometimes to her detriment. She really burns herself at both ends on these things. But yeah, coming on board and becoming deputy chief exec. So working with Bobby in terms of getting into companies, getting into working with our sponsor partners. And one of the things I'm very proud of that we do is that we are a not-for-profit. So our mission is not to pay any corporation tax every year. That's our stated mission. We look for grassroots organizations that work with the trans and non-binary community, because without throwing any shade at the big organizations, the big charities, we can give them money, it will go in the reserves. What we were looking for were organizations in places where there are trans people, which is everywhere, but where there is little provision. So we've worked with organizations like Safe Haven, which is down in Cornwall, which provides effectively respite for trans people, trans people's families. They can literally get away, they can have a night in a pool. So they will rent a swimming pool for the evening. And, as we know, for trans people, swimming is one of the things most of us miss.
Yeah.
If we talk about it a lot, it seems ridiculous, but it's one of those things. They're able to provide recreation, they're able to provide a place to go to, advice and support. So we've been able to support them for a few years now. We've supported Good Vibes down in South Wales, who work with young LGBT people, particularly trans and non-binary people. So again, giving them a space, giving them respite, giving them an escape route from a world that doesn't often really understand them. So, that really gives me a lot of pleasure that, effectively, and to any of our sponsors listening, we mean this in the best possible way. We move money from corporates to the grassroots. We move it to places where it's going to do the most good. And we've given a ridiculously large amount of money over the last few years to these organizations, and that's made me really, really proud. So we're doing good in terms of, our mission is to elevate trans and non-binary voices in the workplace, but we're also doing good by, again, sharing that with people who are doing things we're not able to do. I just haven't got the wherewithal to run a retreat for trans and non-binary people, but I know people who do, and they
Yeah.
need money, so we're there to help them with that. And we run our gala, which is a big event every year, and I get to stand up on stage and make bad jokes. And we have our
Ah.
awards, and we're really proud. Our awards are very, very grassroots focused. They're not public voted. They're not, there's no manipulation. This is us really looking at what have these people done, and these
Mm,
are unsung heroes. These are people who never win anything. And look, we meet at the awards all the time. You do see some of the same faces,
you do.
popping up, and good people. But actually, there's so many people who just don't get put up for these awards. They don't
Yeah.
get that recognition, and I'm so proud. We've had some amazing people who are just astonished that somebody's noticed what they're doing, and I think our community has floated on those people who are in communities up and down the country who are just getting on with it. They're not doing it for the clout. They're not out there in the press. They're just in there doing the right thing and doing it as best as they possibly can. And we wanted to recognize that.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that's beautiful. And whilst yes, the award scene and so is beautiful and a lot of fun. There is a lot to be said for shining a spotlight on those unsung heroes that don't get recognized. We
There
did
is.
it recently with the We Create Space Awards. There's no nominations. There's no well done. You nearly got there. It's you're just being recognized for the
Yeah.
impact that you are having and what you're bringing to this community. And
Yeah.
I know when the lovely Lila was put forward for one of your awards, how much that meant to her, and it really does
Yeah.
have that grassroots feel of what it's all about. So yeah, thank you for the work that you do with that because I think it's really
No.
beautiful and it's wonderful how you shine a spotlight on those people. Um, I want to move away from business. I want to move on to the topic of rugby because I know that equally this is another massive passion of yours.
Yeah.
Where did that stem from? Tell me all about it.
So, I mean, I've been involved in rugby since I was about 6 years old. Um, as a player, and sort of taken off to play mini rugby, and been involved all my life. And I've been a Harlequins fan for pretty much that entire time. I grew up in West London. That was my local club. And in latter years, I've been a season ticket holder with Harlequins for the last 20 odd years. As soon as I could sort of afford to be a season ticket holder, and obviously going with friends, and you sit in a season ticket seat with people around you that you see week in week out, and that was all part of my life. And driving down, because I live quite a long way away from Harlequins now, so it's quite a long drive. So going down with a friend who had the season ticket next to me, and then when I came out for the final time, when I transitioned, it's end of 2019. This was one of those questions. So when you transition, there's loads of questions. What happens? Or, what happens in this circumstance at work? What happens? Rugby was one of those things. It's like, well, okay, this is going to be interesting. These are people who I might not know them, but they know me. They see me all the time. All of a sudden, I'm going to be turning up as this other person, this person they don't know.
Mm.
And the first thing I had to do was phone the club and say, I need to get my season ticket changed, because you do when you transition, you have to go through this process of changing your name with like a million people,
Mm.
and it still pops up. Not calling anyone out, but Boots, you need to sort your Advantage card out. I'm fed up getting dead name emails from you. Um, but you go through this process, and Harlequins were one of them. So I phoned the ticket office and said, look, I am transitioning and I'd like to change my season ticket, please. And there's always a trepidation. You don't know who you're going to get on the end of the phone.
Yeah.
You don't know what the reaction is going to be. And phoned them and they were amazing. They were just, super, super nice about, it was absolutely no problem. It was, yeah, that's lovely. We'll get that sent to you. We won't charge you the £5 we normally charge you. And, thank you so much. And they'd already started to do a little bit of work around LGBT inclusion. So they'd started with a Pride match, which happened just before I came out. That was organised. The first club in the Premiership to do that. So we're familiar with football, where people look down their nose at football in the rugby community, but football clubs have had LGBT support associations for years.
Mm.
They've been in that space. You think about some of the groups that were there, sort of Gay Gooners, Proud Lily Whites, Chelsea Pride. There's all of these groups that exist. There was nothing in rugby. So we had the Pride match. Then COVID came, because I came out just as COVID kicked off, and that meant there was no supporters at rugby, so everything was behind closed doors. So we were watching it all on YouTube and on TV. And then it came to the first time we were allowed to have a match. It was all very bizarre because they were only allowed a certain amount of people in the ground, and you had to sort of sit with spaces between you and all the rest of it. And that was my first time coming back to Harlequins. And I remember, so I park in, so anyone who knows Harlequins, they're in Twickenham, they're near the main stadium. And you go across this sort of footbridge across the A316. And I remember my heart rate was absolutely, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I was terrified. I was hyper vigilant walking to the stadium. How was that going to play out? And it was okay. It was fine. I was with my friend. And that stuck with me, thinking, if I felt that way, knowing I was with somebody, that there was a reduced crowd, that, actually I knew the club were pretty supportive. How would it feel for others fans? So, in conjunction with some other supporters and with the club, we came up with the idea of an LGBT supporters association, because we wanted to make it a safe place for queer fans to be with their partners, sometimes you want to hug the person you're with when we score, when we win.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that there's somebody who's going to be a friendly face if you're coming maybe to your first sporting event, because it can be quite intimidating. There's alcohol on offer, and I'm actually, I don't drink, but for any of us who are in the community, where there is alcohol available and people have been drinking, that sometimes that can become an intimidating place. So I wanted to set something up which was very practical, which was friendship, which was a bit of a queer social club, but also which advocated for queer people with the club. So talked about what we're facing, so homophobic abuse, transphobic abuse, whether we would be welcome, whether we would be able to meet and greet people. That's something we offer. People, if they come into their first match, we will go and meet them at the station, or we'll meet them at their car and we'll walk in with them, so they don't feel that, okay, can I do this? Can I walk in through these crowds? We always have a meeting point at Harlequins, so we have our little table set up in the Chris Robshaw bar. And it just means that we're part of the fabric of the club. We've now had our 6th Pride match, and we have a Pride match for both the men's and the women's teams. We are the only club in the Premiership that's had a Pride strip. So we've actually had a strip created for the LGBT community, which is amazing. And to the extent of even getting our sponsor. So DHL are our sponsor. And again, they probably won't mind me saying that it's one of my bugbears is their yellow and red DHL logo looks awful on our normal strip. Our strip's quite iconic. But for the Pride strip, they used their Pride logo. So they actually put the rainbow logo on it, which was really us coming together with sponsors, with the club,
Mm.
with QuinsPride. So yeah, it's now been a few years of running QuinsPride, and it's not always been easy.
Yeah.
And we've been front and center in the banning of trans people from playing rugby.
Yeah.
That was not fun times. We've had to be speaking up for queer fans because we still remain the only LGBT supporters association in professional rugby globally,
Oh,
which
wow.
is appalling. Really, we're very
Mm.
proud to have been the first, but still to be the only. Although I'm hoping by the end of this year we may have some company. So there's some moves afoot,
Okay.
which I will leave that hanging and hope we can come back with some good news. Um, but for us to have to speak up for queer fans and for what that means, and in the same way, we don't have the same problems as football. Football has a chanting problem, so you get all the homophobic chanting. You don't have chanting so much in rugby.
Yeah.
But what you do have is the shouted remarks. You have the shouted comments because you can drink beer at your seat in
Yeah, of
rugby and you
course.
can't in football. You will get the occasional fan who goes too far. You will get people who are racist, homophobic, misogynistic, ableist, and they will shout things out. And it's about us making it a safe place that says, okay, we don't, that's not what we accept. That's not part of our
Mm.
code of conduct. And if you do that, you won't be watching rugby at our ground. You
Yeah.
won't be welcome in our space. So yeah, that's what QuinsPride's all about. I've got a great committee of people. We represent all of the letters of LGBT, which I'm very proud about. I'm double hatting on that one because somebody
Of
had
course.
to. But it's great to have that breadth of representation, and for the club to take us to their heart.
Yeah.
And I've got to give them credit for that because it's not always easy for them. They've put their head above the parapet as well. And Laurie, who's the chief exec, has really stood up for our community, and he's the first one to say is I think he called himself a crusty straight white guy. So he won't mind me repeating that he said that, but he's not crusty at all. He's really stood up in our
Yeah.
corner, and set the stall out for what inclusion means for Harlequins. And
Yeah.
I think once you get that right, and there's so many other things they do some really amazing stuff for neurodiverse people. So offering, sensory rooms. So if people are overwhelmed by coming to the match, there's somewhere for them to go. Offering, ear defenders and things that may be useful to people. So, not saying everyone needs them, but if you need them, they're there. So
Yeah.
really doing something to say, look, rugby is for everyone. If you want to come and watch rugby, you can come, and be part of our club and our family. And it's really exciting. I love it. You probably hear because I've just gone absolutely off on a tangent.
No, it's just so beautiful to hear so many different things coming up there. You've got inclusion, you've got allyship, you've got community, you've got belonging, and you've got a lot of heart. You've got a lot of heart there from
Yeah,
people.
it's amazing. And I think if I can talk about some of the sort of experiences I've had, so there's been a few times where I've been interviewed on the big screen, so stood in the centre and been broadcast to 15,000 people around the
Yeah.
ground, talking about inclusion, talking actually this year very frankly about the situation for trans and non-binary people,
Yeah.
and that was my protest. That was so the day where lots of people were protesting. I was standing in front of 15,000 rugby fans, and I have to walk back to my seat through the crowd. And yeah, you're going to get those people who they don't get it. They've just come to have a drink and watch some
Yeah.
rugby. But there are some people who will come up and they stopped me as I was walking back and saying, "Thank you for saying that," and I really respect you for saying that, and I'm really proud to be here at Harlequins, or I wish my club did something like that. Somebody who sits in a seat a few seats away from me for years, I hadn't actually exchanged anything other than a nod and a smile and a cheer when we won. They actually came up after one of my talks, on the big screen, and they came up a sort of match later, and they said, "I just wanted to introduce myself. This is who I am." And I listened to what you were saying, and I actually went to a bookshop in London. I went to find out a bit more, and they bought a book about trans liberation, and they said I bought a second copy because I wasn't sure you'd read it or not, and here it is for you. And that's really sort of opened my eyes to something that I think is really important. That really touched me. That was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
so I didn't know how that would go over. People around me, they're really quite protective of me,
Yeah.
as somebody who is very visibly queer, very visibly trans. I'm huge. I stand out. And I do feel that sense of sort of protection and family that comes
Yeah.
from that. And I think every match we've been at, so as I say, we have our table, we give away some rainbow laces, we give away, badges and stuff at the table. We don't charge anything because we don't want there to be any barriers for people. We don't take any money from the club. That's very important to us. We're
Yeah.
independent of the club, so we can hold a mirror up and we can
Yeah.
challenge if we need to. Every match we have one interaction. If there's one interaction, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me, but it could be the coach of a youth team coming up and asking for some laces for their club because they've got some lesbian girls in the club that they want to show their support to, or it's the parent of a child who's just come out who coming up and saying, thank you for doing this because you're showing that there's a place for me to bring my kids in the future. Every match we have some sort of interaction. I have people coming up who are wearing the laces we gave them at the previous match, and they're straight and they're wearing rainbow laces and saying, I'm supporting you, I'm here for you. That makes everything worthwhile. All of the, frankly, the death threats, the rape threats I got, when the ban came through, all of that was bloody awful. It was
Yeah.
horrendous. Being dragged through the newspapers. Actually,
Yeah.
we're making much more of a difference than people think. It's one person at a time, and I don't care if it's one person at a time, because one person talks to one person talks to one person. That's how you win.
I think we all know that change and progress is slow, right? But that is so beautiful. And as someone that is was never that sporty and discovered sport later in life as a queer person, I just didn't think those spaces were for me.
Mm,
Whether it's rugby or running or the gym or whatever, right? I think
yeah,
we believe that we're not meant to be in those places.
yeah,
This is so beautiful to hear that you found that sense of family and belonging and home in that space. So yeah,
yeah.
you're trying to I've learned something so new now, and I think that's so beautiful. So thank you for sharing, Emily. I'm so excited to dive deeper into your origin story. With that, are you ready to pause and rewind?
I will pause and rewind just for you, Neil.
Here we go. Here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about little Emily.
Little Emily. So little Emily grew up in West London, in Hounslow. Just for those who are from that part of the world, and big shout out to Charlie Craggs, who's from that neck of the woods. So
You know, Charlie's name literally came up on the last episode as well, and yeah, need to get her on here. She's due on.
straight out of West London. So every time we meet up, we talk about that as an origin. But yeah, so I grew up there. I mean, I guess in the context of what we're talking about, I knew something was very different about me at the age of 6. So when I was at primary school, it was some very clear memories, really, of the dressing up box, of a fascination with the jewelry selection in the dressing up box, and asking to keep some of it and take it home. And a story I often tell when I'm talking to people is one of my earliest memories is for those who are old enough to remember Top of the Pops.
Yes.
Thursday night was Top of the Pops night, so you get all the music would come on, and on the Friday morning at school in school break time, the girls would try and replicate the dances from Top of the Pops. So they be all sort of dancing, and I wanted to do that because I was obsessed, and probably still am a little bit, with Madonna. I wanted to be Madonna. I knew I wanted to be Madonna. It wasn't just that I loved Madonna; I wanted to be her. And I can remember the girls doing one of the dances from one of Madonna's songs. It was on the playground, and I wanted to join in. And they told me, no boys allowed. And I really just couldn't fathom what was going on. I kind of got that I wasn't supposed to be there, but I knew I should be there. I knew that was it, and I wanted to be, friends. These were my people. Because I think you're very much more segregated when you're that age. The boys go off and play rough and tumbles, and the girls don't. And that was very much how it was. So I knew at that stage, and I think it was more and more obvious to other people. There was the school bully twigged that there was something going on, and there was a point where I was fortunately saved by a teacher, but he was dressing me in a dress and was going to parade me out as Wally of the Week, because he'd seen me admiring some of the stuff in the box, and it was all sort of passed away as being one of those things, so real sort of London school, state schools. So I kind of knew who I was when I was 6, without the articulacy, without the words to sort
Yeah.
of to talk about it. I think really the first time I really spoke up was when I was 10 or 11, so late 80s now. I was depressed. I knew I was depressed because I had I had a Penguin medical encyclopedia at home. My parents had, which I used to peruse occasionally if I wanted a day off school. I'd rummage through to find some sort of illness I could replicate. Wasn't serious enough for a doctor or hospital visit, but it would get me a day off school. But I remember looking through D for depression, and I remember reading it and thinking, "Oh, yeah, that's pretty true." So I remember very clearly walking down the stairs of our house, telling my parents I'm depressed, which was, I think, surprising enough for them to to take seriously. My parents, were very open in that respect. And Mum took me to see a child psychologist in Hammersmith, which is sort of etched on my mind. And I was taken in to see this very avuncular character, who, a very Victorian. I get everything etched on my mind. Very Victorian sort of premises that it was in Hammersmith, and he had this sort of buttoned leather couch, and I'd sit on this leather couch, and he said, "So tell me, what is it that's making you sad?" And for the first time in my life, I said, "Well, I'm a girl. I don't know what's going on. Puberty had started. I just kind of hoped that things would change in a way that made sense to me, and they weren't. My voice had broken, which was awfully distressing and remains distressing to this day. And I watched this avuncular guy just go from being really nice to he just looked disgusted and horrified. And I realized instantly, and I think anyone who's been in the closet knows that feeling, almost like your skin on your body's become too tight for your body, that, oh shit, I've said something I shouldn't say. I've revealed something.
Yeah.
And he basically, it was the start of the conversion therapy, because he's just, you're too big for that nonsense. I was very tall even then. I was 5'11" when I was 10 years old, and
Wow.
he said, "You're too big for that nonsense. Pack it in. What's really wrong with you?" And I really went down. I panicked. My mum was sitting outside. I thought, "Oh God, he's going to tell my mum. I'm going to be. They're going to kick me out. This is going to be awful." And I had to sort of try and push it off as being just something I'd said and I'd made up, and that I had other problems. And I went through a period of very unpleasant therapy with this guy, who I'm glad to say is probably dead now. That probably sounds harsher than it
No.
need be, but it really set me back. So my early years were really very much an attempt to come out of the closet in '87. And very different time. No such thing as puberty blockers, a bit like today, sadly. No real understanding of gender care, but that was my first attempt at coming out, and I was slammed really hard back into the closet.
Yeah.
And I realized that if this was a secret that you couldn't just tell people about, it wasn't safe to reveal. It wasn't safe to confide in people that you are told you can confide in. And that was a hard lesson. That was a very hard lesson to learn when I was young.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know how little Emily you want to know about, but I mean, I just spent my teenage years really repressing, both my gender identity and my sexuality, because I'm bisexual. I knew that at that stage as well.
Yeah.
Section 28 was a thing. So Section 28 passed just the year after that. So just as I was going into my secondary schooling. So I genuinely thought I was the only person like this. That therapist left me
Yeah.
feeling like I was something wrong with me, that I was unique, that there wasn't
Yeah.
anyone like me. The only other sort of trans representation, if you can call it that, I did a paper round, was the salacious stuff you'd occasionally see in the
Yeah.
newspapers. Sex change, bus conductor, and rumpy pumpy, kinky, this, that, and the other. And I thought, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not me. Or it was for comedy, and I was like, well, I'm not I'm not here for comedy. I'm just a
This is
girl.
just who I am.
Yeah.
What did
So
you
yeah,
think
difficult.
about the world at that time? That's a fucking brutal experience to have so young, when you're trying to figure out the world as it
Yeah.
is, without that on top of it. What did you think about the world? What were you making of it?
Well, it was a really interesting time, I've always been probably a bit precocious in these things. I mean, you've got to remember, up until '86, we had the GLC in London, so
Mm,
I'd been exposed to some quite progressive politics in London,
yeah.
and I'd seen them. And look, to be fair to my parents, I think they struggled a bit later on, sort of having it in the family. But the concept of LGBT people for them, they were very liberal about that. They were very
Mm.
open minded, and it was something that was discussed. So I think for me there was very much a sense. I could see the battle because I could see the backlash to Ken Livingstone's GLC back then, and all the same old tropes we're seeing today. You only get a grant if you're a one-legged black lesbian. It's like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. We get all that
Right.
today. So I could see there was that tension and that backlash, but I was also brought up to understand that actually it was really important that people who were LGBT or people from ethnic minorities, as were at the time, or disabled people, actually did deserve to have a fair shake of the whip, and frankly some accommodations made to make life a bit easier. Um, so I was very acutely aware of it, I think, and
Mm.
and I think I was very sort of ridiculously politically engaged. I end up sounding like a sort of young Jacob Rees-Mogg if I'm not careful, but you know,
Uh,
I used my paper round used to take 3 times long because I used to read the papers. I would
yeah.
literally be in trouble for sitting and reading the newspapers cover to cover.
Yeah.
So I saw all of the arguments. I saw all of the Section 28. So it felt to me like a very violent world in terms of into the violence of the speech, in terms of the violence of what was going on. HIV was obviously,
Yeah.
we were right at the height of. I'm going to call it HIV panic. If anyone who's old enough to remember the sort of "Don't die of ignorance" adverts,
I was so
you'd
young, but still, they still sat. I
see
was
them on the
about five,
posters.
still
Yeah,
stick in my head. Yeah.
they had an evening, and I remember my parents sort of making us sort of sit and watch. There was an evening about AIDS awareness, and I remember Alison Moyet did a song. I think she did "Week in the Presence of Beauty"
Mm.
uh, as one of the songs from that evening, and sort of really understanding it because there was this fear, there was this panic about this awful disease, and it was still very much being portrayed as the gay disease. It was, if you do these things, that's what's going to happen. Um, and I think I was very aware of all of these things, and it meant to me that I didn't feel I didn't feel it was something I could talk about. I didn't feel it was a community that I could enter. I didn't know how to get into this community. I didn't. It wasn't obvious. There was no young queer community in those days. It was, the queer community was older people. It was largely older men that you would see.
Mm.
Um, and they were portrayed quite often as being a dangerous culture, as a dangerous place to be involved in. That's where you got AIDS and HIV. And I think that sort of misinformation did a great disservice to people of my generation. That
Yeah.
we were made to feel isolated, and the sort of barriers to entry were there. And queer people were just always the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
Any '80s film you want to watch, transphobia, homophobia, it's all there laid out.
And did that, did this knowing that you were different, obviously it sounds like bullying at school was a problem.
Yeah,
Did that continue into teenage years and such?
I think yeah, the bullying did to a certain extent. I got better at masking. I mean, that's my teenage years. I played rugby. I got into just all the boys stuff,
Right.
and I was in the Air Cadets. I was very proud to be in the Air Cadets, and I really sort of, you know, honed my persona as the sort of the person who told good jokes, who was, somebody that was worth knowing, but kept everything was absolutely kept off the radar at that stage. So it was. I mean, I went so far into the closet that
Mm.
you need a search party to find me at that stage.
Was it a balance? I mean, Emily, like not to blow smoke up your ass, but you are one of the most articulate people I know. You are one of the smartest people I know. You are one of the funniest people I know. Was all of that part of masking? Was it this big balancing act of self-preservation?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, absolutely self-preservation. I mean, as part of me looks back at it as an element of cowardice now. There's part
Okay.
of me that wishes I'd have been bolder and braver and come out and spoken my truth. And I look at, I certainly look at with shame at some of the people who did come out in my
Okay.
teenage years. That I wasn't. I was a friend. I was very close with them, but I wasn't. I wasn't an advocate for them. I wasn't. probably until I was, sort of 18, 19, I started to become more of an advocate for people. My earlier teen years, I was just, I allowed people to know I was safe, but I didn't speak up. And if I heard people being homophobic, I didn't speak up in those days. I lacked the moral courage to do that, which I hold myself, to blame for now. But
Yeah.
yes, I think it was survival. I think it was,
Yeah.
I was terrified somebody would find out my dreadful secret.
Mm.
And I grew up with my younger brother, who's a cis gay man. He was the same. He didn't come out till he was in his mid-30s.
Yeah.
Because I think to a similar extent, obviously he grew up in a similar
Yeah.
environment. I think we both felt we had to mask. I mean, neither of us knew each other. My gaydar is pretty good, so I always sort of suspected my brother was gay.
Mm.
And I'd said as much a couple of times to my mum and dad, which again, I don't know if that was the right or wrong thing to do, but and they'd all say, "Oh, no, he's just hasn't found the right girl yet." And so when he came out to me, I was thrilled. He was terrified, to come out, and I was absolutely thrilled. And I thought about telling him because he came out to me first. I thought, no, it sounds like I'm playing top trumps. I'll
Yeah.
see your cis gay man. I'll raise you a bisexual trans woman.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for both of us, I think we were both
Yeah.
very cautious.
Have you been able to tap into some conversations with others and yourself around that element of taking accountability for not speaking up, but also a little bit of self-forgiveness and kindness in reflection?
A little bit. I'm not very good at self kindness. I'm not very good at self care. I'm not very good at reflecting on the good things about myself. I'm very very self critical.
Mm.
I'm to the extent of self loathing sometimes, if I'm being really honest.
Yeah, I get that.
But I'm better than I was, and I think it is important for me to hold on to remembering that, because I think it's a good antidote to me slipping back into ever feeling
Yeah,
that I could, I despise, and this is where I have a problem with some in our community. I despise people who prioritize their own safety over the safety of the community.
I hear you.
And I've seen that too many times of people, even within the trans community. And this is something I've really struggled with, if I'm being honest, over the last few months. Is I see people saying, "Well, you can't always tell, oh well, if you're pretty enough to pass, then that should be enough." And it's not. We're not the problem. It's those ones. It's those big 6'6" rugby playing
Yeah,
ones. And somebody said that on a call. Somebody I've not met. I was on a call when we were talking about the Supreme Court judgment, and they said, we're not all 6'6" strapping rugby people going. And I'm sat there thinking, no, I'm 6'7", and is that the measure now? So I really think, looking back at myself, then actually it's a good way for me to hold myself accountable. It's a good way for me to maintain that moral courage to say that there's no liberation for any of us without all of us being liberated. So yeah, I think that's the way I rationalize it.
yeah. Okay. I'm glad you're able to know that you need to tap back into it, even if sometimes it's not
Yeah,
accessible.
yeah.
What was the goal in terms of career? What did you think you wanted? That typical question. What did you think you wanted to be when you grow up? And then what happens next?
Funny enough, I wanted to be an RAF pilot, was what I wanted to be. And I
Okay.
remember very clearly going to Ad Astral House in London, which was the recruiting office, at the age of, I think, probably 14 or 15, and saying, I want to be a pilot. And they said, you're too tall.
Okay.
Which is funny, because exactly what the doctor had said to me when I'd come out in '87, which is why funnily enough, my Instagram handle is Too Tall Emily. That's where that came from, was you're too tall for this, you're too tall for that. And I remember the RAF guy saying, "Well, why don't you think about the RAF regiment?" And with the arrogance of youth, I remember saying to him, "Look, if I'm going to have to wear green, I'll join the army." Flounced out of Ad Astral House, which was just up near the BT Tower in London, and headed down to Chelsea Barracks and made an appointment to see the school careers advisor. And that's where I started my process of becoming an army officer. So I remember being sat down in front of a very posh colonel who offered me a load of forms I had to fill out. And one of the questions was about my school, and I sort of put my West London Gasworks comp under the flight path to Heathrow, wrote it down. It said afterwards, day boy or border. Okay, it's not that sort of school. And yeah, that was it. So yeah, the forces were my ambition. One can psychoanalyze that all you like, but it's just something I wanted to do. I think
Mm.
being in the cadets had given me a great sense of purpose, and I'd enjoyed it
Yeah.
very much. So that was it. The other alternatives, I went through a load of alternatives. I wanted to be an archaeologist for a while. So I used to work at Cambridge Steam Museum as a teenager. So that helped, that it scratched the itch of industrial stuff and archaeology. So I spent a few very, very happy summers chipping paint off a steam engine flywheel, ending up appearing in classic Doctor Who. So that's one of my great claims to fame. I was an
That's
extra,
very cool.
which was filmed there, and being on Blue Peter as well, shoveling coal for Simon Groom. So I wanted to be an archaeologist. I think I told my school career advisor I wanted to be a truck driver just to be contrary. So, but the forces were that was really where my head was
Okay.
at.
And how long were you in the forces for?
Just under 5 years in the end. I was injured and had to come out through
Yeah.
injury. But yeah, that was going to be my career. And of course, I joined at a time where it was illegal to be bi, it was illegal to be trans, and had to again really force myself far into the closet because I was terrified of getting that knock on the door from the military police. It was still a very real thing when I was serving. So late
Yeah.
90s.
I mean, I've had conversations with Kelly Holmes about this.
Yeah.
I've had conversation with a good friend, Terry Easton, on the
Mm.
podcast about this. The fear was real.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And even if it was completely unjustified, see, there was no evidence. I wasn't actively part of my community at that stage, and it just wasn't possible. But you know who you are.
Mm,
You know that did I let on? Did I give something up? Did somebody from my past say something? Because of course you go through all the sort of vetting and
yeah.
the security levels. Did somebody say something which has brought that to the fore? And the answer for me, thankfully in a way, was no. But I lived with it, and I think last year I got a box in the post from the army and a crumpled up apology letter from Rishi Sunak and my efforts and ribbon badge, which I wear very proudly. Because I think about all those people who, again, part of my community. And again, this is this challenge to me about moral courage.
Yeah.
I failed that test. So when I went to my regular commissions board, so when you're assessed whether or not you're good enough to be an army officer, they have sort of discussion groups and you have to give a sort of impromptu speech. And actually one of the discussion points was why gays should not serve in the military. And I didn't speak up. I didn't say, well, I think that's wrong. It wasn't my topic, actually. It was one of the other people. But I didn't pose any questions to challenge it because I was terrified somebody would work out
Yeah, of
why I was
course.
asking. Um, so yeah, there are times where I think, yeah, that my opportunity to speak up, but that was the world we were in. And the one thing I will say is the army, the military in the UK are a really good example of how very rapidly, if the will is there, if the political will is there, you can change you can change an organization very, very rapidly. You can change an organization to be inclusive and to be a place which is open to all, still with its problems, but my God, a lot better than it was. And you can do that because the people at the top say, this is what we're doing. This is
Yeah.
how it's going to be. This is our approach. And in the military, it's a little bit simpler because if that's what's said, that's what happens. But it's a great example for business where if the leadership is right, everything then flows from there.
I mean, again, I think that you are just so insightful when it comes to taking those lessons and applying them and showing change is possible.
In everything in life is a lesson, right? There's good and there's bad, and I think maybe it's a curse of being somebody like myself who analyzes things a lot, because I mean that's frankly and fundamentally that's kind of my bag. That's what I do for a profession,
Yeah.
my day job and for my gay job. But actually, I think it's good to keep you grounded. I think it's good to think back and every experience is a lesson, either a good lesson or a bad lesson.
Yeah.
I do sometimes wish I could turn it off. That'd be nice. Actually,
Yeah.
there's just
Oof.
an off switch or a pause switch.
For sure, we've all got those curses that unfortunately sometimes we can lean into them and they're the making of us, but then they can also be the breaking of us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you think without the injury, do you think you would have maintained your career in the military? And what impact do you think that would have had on you as a human?
I, I mean, I certainly didn't have any plans to move on. So possibly. I mean, I don't know. I don't. This is one of the things I don't. One of the sort of sliding doors moments I don't necessarily spend a lot of time
Mm,
on.
yeah,
Possibly, I think is the answer. And in terms of the impact, I mean, would I ever have felt the courage to come out? I mean, once people started coming out, so you think about really it was after '03. That was probably the only time that it would have been safe. Now, I'd have been approaching sort of major at that stage. Would I have felt comfortable to do it? I don't know. I don't know if I'd have had the courage to do it,
mm,
if I'm honest. So, yeah, I guess I could relitigate that one in my mind over and
yeah,
over again, what that would have meant for me. I mean, I have some very dear friends who are serving, who are openly trans, openly LGBT in other ways. Um, and I am in awe of their ability to do that because for all the moves and all the things, the military is always just a microcosm of society. It doesn't
yeah,
exist separately. There is homophobia, there's transphobia, there's racism, there's sexism. We know these things; they all exist within that environment. Would I have felt strong enough to face into those? I don't know. Is the honest
yeah,
answer. I don't know. And without a time machine and the means not to be crocked, I will never know.
yeah, yeah. One of those things, maybe not to spend too much time thinking back on.
Yeah, yeah. I've got plenty enough going on in this melon of mine without adding another thing. Yeah.
So with that in mind, what did next steps look like for career? How did
So
you make a shift?
yes, I kind of didn't know what I was going to do. I genuinely had no clue, and I came out into the civilian world and sort of ended up doing a few sort of temporary jobs, contract jobs in London. And I was renting a flat in East London at the time in Stratford before it all got prettified as before the Olympics were there, when it was not the place to be. And one of my first civvy jobs, I was out for drinks. So my second coming out time, I was sort of out for drinks with the team, and there was an openly cis gay man at work, and I'd had a few drinks. We were in the dog its coat and badge on just by Blackfriars Bridge in London, and I'd had a few drinks, and I, for whatever reason, decided to come out to this guy and said, I'm really struggling because I was really struggling at that point. I used the word that was the only one I knew at the time. I said, I'm transsexual and I'm really struggling. And again, I just watched his face change, and he just went from somebody who was enjoying a drink to this look of disgust. And I
Mm,
remember again feeling the skin get too tight for my body. And he said, "What the fuck you told me that for?" And I just knew I'd done something wrong. And he looked around, and we had all the other colleagues from work around. He said, this dirty bastard's just told me? It's a fucking tranny. And I remember just getting up, stumbling up, running out of the pub, running onto Blackfriars Bridge. I climbed over the parapet at Blackfriars Bridge onto the light gantry, and I spent several hours contemplating jumping into the Thames and ending my life. That was my first real brush with suicide, and I couldn't do it. I didn't have the courage to go through with ending my life, and I sort of clambered back over and nearly died anyway because my legs had gone dead, and I was trying to get over the parapet. I nearly fell in. And walking home back to Stratford from Blackfriars, just in tears, you can imagine sort of how long that took me, just stopping all the
yeah,
way down the Mile End Road and thinking I've ruined my life. I never went back to that job, just didn't go back. Told everyone I'd been sacked. And I fell into doing project management. I went to work for Sainsbury's, and again, it started as a sort of temporary contract, and I just discovered I was quite good at project management, just bossing people around and articulating things, and started a project management career there, which is effectively in one guise or another what I do today.
Yeah.
I'm now vice president of strategic change with a FTSE 100 company. So it's been a sort of progression, but it is all about organising and working
Yeah.
that through. But yeah, it was no, but I've not met. Well, that's not true. I have now, but of my generation, I've never met anyone who intended to be a project manager. We all got into it by accident. We're much more deliberate about it now, which is a good thing
Yeah.
professionally.
For
We
sure.
really do build. For
Yeah.
young people, there's a great career progression. But in my day, it was you literally, if you were bossy enough and you were able to organise people,
Yeah.
then you made a good project manager. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
complete
Yeah.
accident.
It's same. It's pretty much the same for me. And events just kind of happened, and it just very, very similar kind of very similar kind of thing. Mental health is something that you talk about a lot, and I've
Yeah,
not heard you talk about that experience specifically.
yeah.
Has that shaped how you approach mental health in the workplace now and supporting other people to make sure that they never ever feel that way?
Yeah, that's the mission. That's where I started off, was talking about mental health, and I said that was my first brush with suicide. I had another, which was in 2019, which was just before
Mm,
my final coming out. I attempted to take my life while I was on holiday. Um, yes, and I think it comes from the fact that I never felt comfortable with talking about how I felt at work, and
yeah,
I ended up leaving Sainsbury's because I effectively had a breakdown. It was I think a lot of things going on, and I was crying in the office and having to go through that process of therapy and at that time medication as well to support that. And they didn't feel that there was anyone wanting to talk about that. It was seen as weakness, and this is early 2000s, which it doesn't to me feel that long ago. Though somebody really ruined my day the other day by saying we're closer now to 2050 than we are to 2000, since we've gone into July.
yeah,
And I'm just disgusted with the person who told me that. And if they can never speak to me again, that would be much appreciated. But it doesn't feel that long ago.
yeah,
2000 doesn't feel that long ago, and it does feel like it was a complete taboo. It was a career ender. It was you don't want to be in a situation like that. And I think, honestly, I think it's given me a lot of strength to understand the limits of my mental health and my mental well-being. I think I think talking about suicidal ideation, I think is really important, because when you are in that place, you are not. People say, "Oh, just reach out." They say, "Oh, just reach out." If you ever feel that way, reach out. You can't.
you can't.
If you're at that stage, the way I describe it to people is it's like being surrounded by black cotton wool. You're in sensory deprivation. This is how it certainly felt for me. Is that you didn't know about anything going on around you. You couldn't think about family. You couldn't think about friends. You couldn't think about what you were leaving behind. It didn't matter. All that mattered was it was just too painful. It
Yeah,
just can't. You can't keep going. And I want people to understand that you can break through. Somebody can break through from the outside. Now, in my second attempt, it was just a complete coincidence. A friend, an old dear friend, American friend of mine, just messaged me, and I looked at my phone. I was sitting on the parapet of a dam in Belgium, and I just checked my phone to make sure my life insurance would pay the mortgage. That's what I was
right.
doing. My phone buzzed, and it was somebody saying, "How's the holiday going?" And for whatever reason, I replied. I said, my life, I've ruined my life. My life's destroyed." That's the first person I came out to as me.
Yeah,
That's the first person who accepted me as me. And they saved my life. They ripped away that black cotton wool. So I think by talking about that, by talking about what for me, and I'll be really clear, this is very personal mental health,
yeah,
what works and what doesn't work. For me, what worked was she grounded me. She brought me back to talking about, family and my daughter and acceptance, and that friendship was really important to her, and therefore to me. Um, and I do think it's important then to share that, because I think more of us feel these feelings than anyone
yeah,
ever admits to. I think for some people they find it very difficult to articulate it. Um, and if I can articulate how I felt, and again, stressing I'm talking about my experience, it's not the same for everyone else. But I think by doing that, I think it gives those people who aren't in that place, who haven't felt, that sort of level of despair or distress, it gives them a point of reference, and I think it just gives them an appreciation that it can impact anyone. I think
Yeah.
that's the crucial thing. It doesn't matter who you are. Mental ill health doesn't give a shit who you are.
Yeah.
You can't outrun it. It can hit anyone, and all you can, it's a bit like Bismarck said, you can't control the current of events. You can only sit and steer. And I think mental ill health is very similar to that. You can't control how it's going to happen, but you can learn how to steer your way through a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get that across to people, if we can help people to understand that, I'm very lucky in my day job. My organisation really takes mental health very seriously, to the extent that my manager, who's part of our executive committee, he's very open about his mental health struggles. He,
Yeah.
he talks about them openly, and I think the more we can do that, the more you feel that actually it's a normal part of human existence. That sometimes you're going to feel mental health isn't where it wants to be, in the same way physical health isn't. And what I think is changing now from 25 years ago is we're getting beyond the slogans. We're getting beyond the "it's okay not to be okay," because that's
Yeah.
true, but that doesn't solve anything. It doesn't change anything. What changes things are people telling their stories. What changes are people saying, "This has happened to me. This is how I felt. This is how I dealt with this. This is how I came back from it. This is how I recovered.
Yeah.
This is how awful it was for 3 months. I was burned out for 3.5 months last year. I wasn't working. I couldn't do it. And I
Mm.
talk about it really openly about what that feels like and how that is, and
Yeah.
what the triggers for that were, because some of them were internal to me, some of them were external, some of them were other people's behaviors,
Yeah.
some of them were just the world around me, And the more you can talk about that, we can think about our impact on other people, and how we can hope both help support people to get better,
Yeah.
but also how we can stop people getting there in the first place.
I have heard you talk to that story, that life-saving conversation. I've heard you
Yeah.
talk to that before. And,
Mm.
what a friend,
Big shout out to Amy.
whatever, whether the timing aligned or coincidence, thank God for that text message. And yeah, I'm just so grateful you're still here and that you're able to share the way that you do.
On balance, so am I.
And that's beautiful to hear, right? Did you ever think that you would be able to say that?
I think there were times where that I definitely didn't, and look, I'll be honest, there are times where it gets dark again.
Yeah.
The last 6 months, actually, and this is really important to talk about. Since a transition saved my life, okay,
Yeah.
and it's been really, really hard. There's no two ways about it. But actually, fundamentally, it made me a happier person. It made me a calmer person. It's made me a
Mm.
better dressed person for sure. Um, but the last 6 months, I hadn't had any sort of suicidal ideation or any sense of despair. The last 6 to 9 months, I will admit there are days where that comes back in. There are days,
Mm.
particularly with some of the government activity that's going on, with some of the media attacks on us as a community. There are days where I do feel that, and I'm not the only person in the community who said
No.
that, where they've had settled, or pretty much settled mental health for a good long period, and I think government and media need to reflect on their part in causing damage to people who are actually living well, who are moving through life, and I've definitely felt that. I mean, as I say, on balance, I absolutely think it's a good place for me to be, and I enjoy life. I was out. I've started trying to get out in nature a bit more. I was out on South Downs over the weekend. I didn't do London Pride. Just going to put it out there. Nobody asked me to do London Pride. Just let's just get that out there. No invitations. Um, but no, I was down in Worthing, and so I did get to see the Worthing Pride Parade, which big up to them to get those sort of small town things running. I think that's amazing. But I was up on the South Downs, and it was lovely, and I was so glad to be alive. I was able to see for miles. I could see Brighton in the distance. I could see over to Eastbourne. You just see the whole of the sea arrayed beneath you. I was up on a hill fort, and uh, those are the moments where I'm glad I lived, and I was up there as me.
Yeah.
No, and that's something
Yes.
I never thought would ever happen. I was up
Yeah.
there puffing and blowing and wheezing, and but I was me. I was
Yeah.
unashamedly Emily,
So
and that's amazing. And again, just because I can, a real big shout out. There's a YouTuber. They won't thank me for saying this, but Abby Barnes, who runs a channel called Spend More Time in the Wild, and they are the most inspirational person I think I've come across in the sort of outdoorsy space. Very proudly non-binary, and they've gone through a lot of things that people in the non-binary community go through. And I was just watching one of their videos, and they're having their first swim without a top on. In I think it was the Pyrenees or somewhere in Corsica in a mountain tarn, and the joy of being outside and being
yeah.
themselves is what I felt. I mean, I wasn't doing the GR20, which is like the hardest trail in Europe, scrambling around. I was just having a little day walk up in the South Downs. But that sense of being yourself
Yeah.
in nature, that's a great antidote to everything else going on.
Firstly, I love the expression unashamedly Emily.
Because I
And
was ashamed for years.
yeah,
I was ashamed to be trans, to be this person, and I have no shame. Pride is the antidote to shame. That's
absolutely.
why we call it pride. Pride is the antonym to shame. Pride banishes shame. I am proud.
Yeah. Damn right, you fucking should be as well. There is so much there that I think government and media need to take on board with what you've just said. But what you have just shared, in this whole conversation, but particularly in the last 10 minutes or so, allies really, really need to take that on board.
Mm.
Allies need to listen and listen and hear again. I really hope they do. My final question for you for this segment, tapping into that pride, right, that I can feel emanating from you right now. What are you most proud of to date?
I mean, the obvious answer is I'm proud of my daughter. To be honest, the obvious answer to say, but I am every day. I'm absolutely proud of her and proud of how she is with me and how she reacted to having a transparent. Because it's not easy. It's not the easiest thing to have revealed
Mm,
to you. Um, so I mean that's I guess a very obvious thing to say. I think I'd also just say I'm proud I survived.
yeah.
That's the reality. I'm proud that I survived. I'm proud that I've got through everything, and something will come up today, something will come up tomorrow that I'll have to get through again. Um, but I am proud still to be here. It's as simple as that. Because everything else stems from that. If you're not here, you can't do any more good, can you? Try to do good.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quick-fire questions?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
What album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
I'll choose an album. So it's an album by a group called the James Taylor Quartet. So acid jazz was my thing growing up. That was my first type of music that wasn't anyone else's. It was just me. I found it. I had a massive row with my mum and dad, and I roared out of the house, and I got on the tube and went into London, went to Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus, and I bought this album, ridiculously overpriced because it was Tower Records, and it's an amazing album. I still got it today. It's called "In the Hand of the Inevitable" by the James Lee Quartet, and still worth listening to. Just having its anniversary, 30th anniversary re-release. So I've just reordered it on vinyl because I'm that sort of person. Amazing album, really really worth listening to.
Check it out, people. What is a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
What's the saying? Well, the one I put in the bin is "We are where we are." I hate that. Oh, we are where we are. No, we're here because of a reason.
Yeah,
Let's understand that. I think the one I'd love. I'm trying to live by, and it's something a lovely person I know online, a trans person from the US who's now living in Canada called Alyssa, said is do the thing,
do
do
the
the thing,
thing.
because as she rightly says, there's so many things that I could have done pre-transition I now can't do. Places I could have gone to, places I wanted to see that are now closed off to me, and I never did the thing.
Yeah,
Do the thing. If you can do the thing, do the thing.
yeah,
Because you literally have only got one life. Yeah, do the thing.
really do. What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
Transition. It's as simple as that. I mean, navigating transition and navigating the world as a woman. It's one hell of an adventure. Best one.
And what three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Stubborn, tenacious, and frightened.
Stubborn, tenacious, and frightened.
Yeah.
Does the order matter on those?
No, not really. No, I mean, I think it's really important to recognise that I like any honest trans person. I'm frightened. I am frightened of what might happen when I walk around in London. I've been assaulted. I've been spat on. Outside my
Mm,
office in London.
no,
These things happen. I think it's right to reflect on that. I think fear is not something to be ashamed of. Fear is a very valid thing to be aware of. And I think the tenacity and the stubbornness, I think they're my ways of getting through the fear. That's
yeah, for me, the Emily that I know, it's I would flip those words, and because I think that you've just hit the nail on the head, is that you still continue to show up, and you can still continue to show up with that tenacity, with that stubbornness, but also with such heart and passion for people.
it's what gives me purpose, and purpose is really really important. Everyone has to have a purpose, and it's one of the things we talk about with corporates, and anyone who's in a corporate knows the sort of there is sometimes a mantra about purpose, but it's really important to think about not only the purpose of the organization you're part of.
Mm,
So, for whether it be a queer organization or a corporate organization, what's your purpose? What are you there to do?
yeah,
Got to have that North Star. But what's your individual purpose?
yeah,
Really actually just spend some time and think to yourself, what gives me joy? What gets me out of bed in the morning? What keeps the fear at bay?
yeah.
All of those things are part of your purpose.
Absolutely. Well, I have a feeling that some of those things might come up in these next few questions. So let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
Yes, there's a few bits. I'll be talking in advance of the Some Women's World Cup, Rugby World Cup coming up in this year. So I've been asked to speak at an event there, which is interesting because as you understand from my comment, it is the Some Women's World
Yeah,
Cup. It's not something that's open to all. So I've got some thoughts to share on that one. So I think that's going to be quite exciting with some of the other stuff that's going on that I alluded to earlier. Obviously with Trans in the City, we've got the planning for the gala in November is underway, and that's always the highlight of our year is getting everyone together. And we've built a really lovely partnership with University of Arts London as well over the last couple of years. And for those who were at the British LGBT Awards, you'll have seen the Art of Trans Joy exhibition, which was something we were really proud to be running and working with young trans and non-binary artists to support them. So I think that's going to be super exciting in the coming year. And at some point, I might have a holiday, and I'm quite
well,
excited about the
hey,
thought of that. So I'm going to try and get back to Malta, which I loved. last time I was there. So I've been twice to Malta. I went once for a work conference. It was my first trip abroad as me. And it was just when COVID was still floating around. They just lifted some of the things, and I never had COVID. And I went to Malta, and I got COVID on day one of the conference, and they locked me in my hotel room for 10 days, so I could see Malta from my balcony, but nothing else. And
Okay,
that was pretty torturous. And then I went back for a holiday. I loved it, so I'm going to go back again
good.
because I love it.
It's a great place. Good food as
Yeah,
well.
it is.
What brings you joy?
Uh, my family and the outdoors really, really bring me joy, and the friend group I've built, which I consider my family as well.
Yeah, chosen family, everything.
Just getting time with people, and just feeling loved. Quite frankly, that might sound a little bit needy, but I just to feel loved is amazing. It gives me joy.
Good, good, good. You are so loved, by the way. Like, so many people I know absolutely love you, me included. What takeaways, practical takeaways, do you have for anyone listening wanting to carve out a career in inclusion or create an inclusive space?
Um, I think boldness is the crucial thing. I think don't worry about what everyone else is going to say.
Mhm.
Don't be blown off course by uh, the head and tail winds that come and go from people. Actually, you know, a couple of mantras I have here: good business is good humanity, right? So if you do the human thing, if you do the thing which is right for people, that's going to be good business. That is always going to be good business
Yeah,
because people will, even if they don't realize they're doing it, they're gonna want to work with you, and I think that builds inclusion. And back to what I said before, do the thing. If you think there's something you can do that's going to make a difference, do it.
yeah,
Don't think about it. Don't ask somebody else for permission. Go and do it. Make it happen. You mentioned some of your previous guests who've done exactly that, and they're inspiring. But who gave them permission to do it? Who told them they could? Nobody did. So
yeah,
don't wait for somebody to tell you it's okay. Just
yeah.
do it.
I absolutely. I'm an ask forgiveness. I've asked forgiveness rather than permission kind of person myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's definitely something in there. And I mean, look, just try not to hurt people.
Mm.
If you work on that basis, you're not going to hurt people. You're always going to do something good,
Yeah,
even if it's just little, or even if it just fizzles out. It's going to have done something for somebody. Back to my point about the rugby. People say, "Oh, yeah, but it's only one person." It doesn't matter. You speak to one person every day. It's 365 people a year, and they're going to speak to one person every day. And they're going to speak to one person every day. That's how you make it happen.
beautiful. My final question for you is this. Do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
There's a voice in all of our heads that tells us that we're not good enough. There's a voice in our heads that tells us that we're overstepping the mark, or we're out of our comfort zone,
Mhm.
or we shouldn't be doing it. And learn how to ignore that voice. I think that's the crucial thing. And I'm still learning. That voice still wins sometimes with me. That voice still, goes off in my ear. But I'm getting better at telling it to get knotted, and move on from that. So I think you've got to recognise that actually your harshest critic is often yourself. Your
Yeah.
harshest critic is often the internal one. Just learn how to turn that off as much as you possibly can. And that ain't easy. And be comfortable with that as well. But sometimes it ain't easy.
Emily, I have loved spending this time with you. Thank you for
I've loved it
being
too.
just the most incredible guest. Yeah, I think you know how much I value, appreciate, and love you. And I
Well, likewise.
thank you for the way that you show up in the world and for the wisdom, for the humor, for the brilliance, for the excellence that you bring to our community.
Oh, I don't know what to say to that. That's made my head far too big. Thank you very
Take
much,
it.
Neil.
Tap into that ego, babes.
I'll file it away in the next time I'm feeling a bit low. I'll remember what you said. Thank you.
I can't wait to see you soon. Take care.
You too.
June, what a conversation, not one that is without its heaviness, through some dark times, but I think it's really important that we give space for that as well. Giving space for those three words that Emily shared that really, really do encapture her story so well: stubborn, tenacious, frightened. Um, it is frightening out there for the trans plus community. It's a scary, scary time for so many people that I know and love personally, and many that I don't. And I think it's really important that we honor that and we use that to show up. Is that we focus on the fact that allyship and action is really, really needed right now. And Emily, Bobby, and the team at Trans in the City, they work their asses off to show people what action looks like, what allyship looks like, and whether that is donating to a trans plus charity or organization, getting people like Trans in the City in your organisation to talk about trans inclusion, whether that's going on a protest and being counted and showing up. For me, featuring trans folk on this podcast and shining a spotlight on their stories and showing people, what, so many of our experiences are unique, but there's also commonalities, and there are so many different ways you can show your allyship, and Emily really does speak to that. And that stubborn and tenaciousness and tenacity, sorry, and the fact that visibility comes at a cost, but it's a cost that Emily is willing to take. For example, with the rugby, changing one person at a time, showing up, and really putting yourself out there because we need to. Really, really heartwarming and heartbreaking to hear Emily having gone through those experiences of poor mental health and suicide attempts, through to being glad and proud that she is still here. And I know I speak for myself and so many other people when I say I'm so glad too, because our community needs people like Emily, and she is such a beacon of light in our community, even during dark times. And hearing her talk about, through all of those fires, she still sees light. She sees light in the sense that there's more organisation and urgency. There's the dropping of egos. There's the coming together of our community, which again is really, really needed right now. And yeah, do the thing. Do the thing. What a great statement to live by. We all need to get on board. All need to get on board with that. And don't ask for permission. Just do it. It's needed, because change is possible. And we can all be part of the change that's needed in society. So I hope that you, as an ally, have taken something away from this, whether inside the community, from outside the community. It's all needed right now. Please do like, subscribe, and share. Help take these conversations to a wider audience. These stories, Emily's story, really, really needs to be heard. So stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. Last episode of the season next week. Cheers all.